Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Brave New Weed podcast, high-minded conversations for the post-prohibition era. Matthew, I'm with my friend Matthew Hendershot. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Joe. Afternoon for me over here in Germany, but it's still a pleasure to join you on the episode.
I'm very glad you're here, and I'm very excited about this episode because we have something really interesting. We have Alon Blatt is the founder of one of the few elder care centers in the world that use cannabis to treat elders, which is a really interesting topic and obviously sort of a groundbreaking and maybe even a taboo topic in certain circles. So I'm really interested for you to hear this episode particularly. I think you're going to really like it because I know you're an elder.
Thanks.
Soon to be elder. And I'll tell you more about that a little later in the episode when we continue. But first, I want to say that this episode is brought to you by Medical Cannabis Mentor, which is an online learning platform with courses for healthcare providers, dispensary personnel, otherwise known as bud tenders, and soon patients. And if anybody in our listening audience is interested in learning about this or taking one of our courses, I want to ask you to email us at hello@medicalcannabismentor.com because we're going to offer a 30% discount on the courses to sort of get the material out there and educate people more. I really want people to see the material, and I don't want price to get in the way. So again, it's hello@medicalcannabismentor.com. If you're interested, send us a note and we'll set up a coupon for you at 30% discount.
Listeners, we'd also like to remind you that if you'd like to become an individual supporter of the Brave New Weed podcast to help us continue to bring you the news, these interviews, this insight into the cannabis world, we would encourage you to visit patreon.com/bravenewweed and become a patron today. For as little as $1 a month, you can personally support the show. We pre-release the episodes out to our Patreon patrons so you get early access. There's also a variety of tiers of sponsorship available where we offer bonuses, additional materials, invites and news to special events when we have that opportunity, and giveaways when they come our way. So again, visit patreon.com/bravenewweed, and if you're able, become a patron today.
Let's talk about some news, Matthew. What have you been seeing lately? What's been catching your eye in the world of cannabis?
Well, the world continues to spin, and locally and state level and even internationally, we're starting to see more and more states and communities embrace medical cannabis first and then make their way slowly toward the recreational space. Obviously, some interesting news out of Denver with their decriminalization of psilocybin, which is not necessarily active in the cannabis space for us, but that is an interesting nod to the sort of sea change. But just to talk about a couple of things, I think we would be remiss to not mention the New York Times Magazine article that finally sort of gets CBD.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. They've been running a lot of pieces sort of questioning it and looking at it and warning people about it. All misplaced, in my opinion. And finally, this writer in the Sunday paper really starts to tell the story of CBD, what it really is, he keeps trying to come up with the downsides and the side effects, but I read the piece several times, and there really aren't any side effects other than poor manufacturing processes, which is a result of the lack of regulation happening. Yeah. So I encourage everybody to read the story. It's not a news story. Those of us in the world know it, but it is a coherent piece, and it brings people into the understanding of how this works and why it's unusual, and maybe why it's as broad and as effective as aspirin, which I think is well worth understanding.
Well, and the article goes to great length to sort of explain how the mythos around CBD has so rapidly grown to being like a cure-all for everything, yes. which it's not. And, we can all admit that it's not a cure-all for everything. It's not a cure at all. It's just a way to sort of correct and make some more balance inside your system. And it's a treatment for symptoms all across the board, but where you would definitely never call it a cure. And I think every medical professional knows that. So it is nice to see this sort of explanation of the myth, and also just a deep dive into the facts of what the chemical can and can't do.
Exactly. There are very few cure-alls in the world, let's face it. Let's look at it as a way of bringing relief, maybe sometimes relief from life itself. The other story that really caught my eye was this guy, what is his name? Alki David, one of the wealthiest men in the world.
I believe it's, Alcibiades David, who is a, this is such a wild story. Go ahead.
Go on. No, you tell me.
No, so he is a billionaire and is tied into the Coca-Cola franchise. Their family, the Leventis family, is actually the largest commercial bottling facility in Europe, and their merger with Coca-Cola makes them basically the blanket distributor of Coca-Cola in Europe. And he was popped with a total of $1.2 million worth of products on his private plane, including vape tanks, plants, edibles. And they had over 5,000 living plants loaded onto the plane that he was trying to
smuggle on a private plane these days, isn't it? Where was he smuggling them into?
Oh, he's trying to bring them into Europe. The authorities believe that the crop was actually being brought in to be used by his medical cannabis company, Swiss X, which specializes in CBD products, which is his big defense. His thing was stating that all of these are hemp and hemp-based products, and therefore he is not violating the law. But authorities are taking a much closer look at this because that may or may not be accurate. Listeners, you can join the conversation with Brave New Weed today by visiting us on any of our social media platforms. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all at Brave New Weed. We'll bring you to a place where you can like, comment, share the show, interact with other listeners, and keep the conversation going. Together, we are the world of Brave New Weed.
The final news item that I want to talk about is actually an interview I did with Melissa Moore, who is the state director of the Drug Policy Alliance in New York. And I did this because New York actually has a second chance at legalization, and it's up to us to push our legislators to pick this up in the next session, and this is going to occur in May and June. So this is a great interview with Melissa. It's going to tell you exactly what to do. On our blog, if you are a New Yorker or if you have friends in New York, you can forward them this. It's going to take a phone call on all of our behalves to get our legislators to sort of open up their eyes and vote for legalization. So this is Melissa Moore, who is the state director of the Drug Policy Alliance, joining us right now. So Melissa, thank you for joining me today on the Brave New Weed podcast. A pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Well, it's really important that we do have you on, especially if you live in New York, because we're at a precipice right now. And it's just odd to be talking to you just around the time when Denver legalized the use of psilocybin mushrooms, and the sad state of New York cannot get its act together to legalize cannabis. Is there anything we can do about this?
There absolutely is. You're completely right that we're at a critical juncture right now. We have 6 weeks left of the legislative session to pass marijuana regulation and legalization in the state. And part of the reason why New York is lagging behind many of our counterparts is that we actually have to move this through the legislature. We don't have the option of doing a ballot initiative here, which is what Colorado did initially to legalize, and what they did again with psilocybin mushrooms, and what has been the case in every single other state where they've legalized so far, aside from Vermont, but basically they decriminalized. They didn't actually establish the market structure when they passed it through their legislature. Yes. So what we're looking at here is how do we shift and really build the groundswell of voices talking to their state representatives. People all across New York at this moment have to contact their representatives to tell them this is what they want to see happen in New York, that they absolutely support legalization, that it's the smartest move that New York can make right now across like a whole host of reasons, right? And everybody comes at this from a different angle. You know, it's really amazing looking at the intersectionality of cannabis. And, you know,
Okay, so one of the things I know is that studies have shown that the argument of that everybody has the right to do with their body is not an effective argument. It does not move the needle. What are the things people should be saying to their I'm sorry, I'm so cynical about New York legislators. I think we live in such a silly and old-fashioned and sort of almost, I'm not sure it's corrupt or what, but what can people say to their legislators to actually get them off their asses and move in the right direction?
Yeah, I think the really crucial point is to underscore that the status quo is unacceptable. We know that prohibition has been a failure in every way that you could possibly measure for success, right? It's failed in terms of reducing use, which was its stated goal. It's failed in terms of being a huge and expensive waste of resources for our state that we could much better devote to other things that actually build up communities and build up our state. And it's been a total failure with regard to racial and economic justice. So on every level, we know that what we're doing right now has not worked. The tinkering around the edges, you know, New York has decriminalized low-level marijuana possession since 1977. And yet in that time span, we became the marijuana arrest capital of the country. There were more than 800,000 arrests in New York under decriminalization. So clearly,
that is insane. That is insane.
It blows the mind. It blows the mind. And so clearly what we're doing now hasn't worked on every single level by which you could possibly measure that. It's been an abject failure. So how do we move forward in our state that, you know, sometimes, to your point, takes a while to steer the ship in a new direction? But at this point, you know, as we're looking at the outcomes in states that have gone before us and have already legalized, you know, how do we look at what's happening on the ground there? What are some of the lessons we need to learn in order to make our policies for legalization as robust as possible, and to really look out for, you know, the overarching goals that we have for our state, right? Which is to make sure that everybody across the board has the opportunity to live their life, you know, with dignity, free of harassment, and free to make decisions that they want to for their own body. We actually have an avenue to do that.
So before I ask you what we can do, which we will, of course, say, I want to ask you what went wrong? How could New York so historically blunder in not passing this legislation a month ago?
The post-mortem is painful. We know that we were extremely close. And just to back up for listeners, Governor Cuomo introduced legalization as part of the state budget process. It was a policy bill to be negotiated with the rest of the actual financial portions of the budget. And there was actually a lot of alignment on what it should look like, a lot of will toward making it happen in the budget, and yet couldn't get it over the finish line. I would say Albany did its Albany thing, where ego and politics got in the way. And we have the opportunity now through the rest of the legislative session to pin down exactly what this should be. You know, the bill to legalize.
You haven't really told me what went wrong. I mean, yes, Albany did what it did, but why did certain people who looked like they were going to back this suddenly turn about face and say no?
You know, I wish I could be inside of people's heads enough to diagnose that to the level that would be the most helpful for all of us, right? But we know that ultimately people didn't feel the pressure to make it happen. And that's true of, you know, the leaders on all levels. You know, the governor had been out in front saying that he wanted legalization to happen. And then in the waning days of the budget, started to throw cold water on the notion, and then tried to sort of pivot back. You know, we saw a similar wishy-washiness from other legislative leaders. And what we need right now is true leadership. We need people to be innovative and bold and to really step up to the plate and say, New York is going to tackle this in the way that we actually know how to do, especially being the financial heart of the country. We can figure this out.
Well, can we or can't we? So you're saying it's basically up to us, the citizens. What can we do and what should we do and when do we need to do it by?
We have to do it constantly. And what we need people to do at this point is to contact their representatives and say that they support legalization. Let them know that there's a really broad variety of people who back this, that it's not just kind of the stereotypical folks that they often sort of typecast and then try to push to the margins, but that this is really something that people across the board in this state support. And we know that because the polling data shows it, but they need to hear it constantly from their constituents.
Who are the key legislators that need to hear this?
Yeah, I mean, I would
my
say
people in Manhattan I don't have to worry about my people in Manhattan. I know that.
No, but folks in Manhattan also, we need to push them to be champions. At this point, not enough people are actually saying this is an urgent priority. So even if your representative is already on the bill, that's great. Congratulate them for that and say, I need you to speak up and I need you to be a champion on this issue right now. And if your representative isn't on the bill yet, encourage them to do that and also say, look, we have your back. This is something that your constituents want to see. This is going to make people's lives better across the state. And we need you to make sure this is a priority for these next 6 weeks of the session. We absolutely can't get to June 19th and be in a situation where we have not passed legalization in New York. That's unacceptable. So everybody should go.
So the deadline is June 19th?
That's the last day of the legislative session in New York. So June 19th is what we're aiming at. It should move prior to that. We don't want to get caught up in the end of session, what they call the big ugly, like the big omnibus kind of catch-all bill that tends to go through. We actually have a piece of legislation that's been pending since 2013 in front of the legislature. So, the comments
it's
about
just embarrassing. It's just
right. I mean, it was nuts in the budget.
That.
So many people saying like, this is too much too soon. It's so complicated. We need to take our time. And the fact is, we have had tremendous amounts of time. Legislators have had years and years and years to analyze the bill, to go through it all. And the bill sponsors, Senator Kruger and Majority Leader Peoples-Stokes, have been incredibly thorough and comprehensive in the bill. And they're actually introducing some additional updates and amendments, most likely next week, they'll land, to get us through the end of the session and really bring the bill up to speed and taking into account all of the conversations that happened during the budget period. But the fact is, we know what we're talking about here is basically a framework and the principles by which we want to legalize. The specific nitty-gritty details always were going to be handled during the regulatory period. So that's the next 8 to 12 months after we actually pass the bill, promulgating what all of the different very minute detailed regulations actually look like. What we're passing right now are the principles and the values by which we want to do this.
Very good. So for those of us who may not know our representatives and state senators and state assemblymen, where can we go to find that easily? Does DPA have a listing online? Who has it and where can it be done easily, quickly, and semi-effortlessly?
Absolutely. So the best resource where all of this information is pulled together is on the Start Smart Coalition website. That's smart-ny.com. And on the homepage, you'll see a link to take action right away with one click. You can be patched through to your state representatives and also get a template to email them and tweet at them as well. And we recommend doing all three and it takes 2 minutes. Do it every day. Make sure that they consistently hear your voice and share that with everybody that you know. We also have lobby days.
Yeah,
get on the bus.
That's important. Share it.
Exactly.
Share it with
exactly.
people,
Because
right?
part of what we're battling is also this notion that this is inevitable and that of course it will happen. And I think a lot of people don't realize that if we don't push really hard right now for the next 6 weeks, this could very well not happen in New York. We need everybody to realize that we're at a make or break moment.
I think inevitability in politics at this point is not assumed. Hello, Hillary Clinton. I think we need to be very proactive. Okay, so what else? Get on the bus, you said?
Get on the bus. Yeah, we're having huge lobby days in Albany on May 29th and June 13th. So this is a moment where we'll have free buses, transportation provided from New York City, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse. If you're in some other part of New York State and you need a ride, reach out to us at smart-ny.com and we will get you there. This is the moment when we have to make it very clear that all of those daily calls that we're doing have people behind them. And we'll stand together in Albany with hundreds of people from all across the state saying we support marijuana legalization and you have to do it now. This is a priority.
And will they listen?
They will. It's so fascinating. During the waning days of the budget, we basically shut down the Capitol for 3 hours in front of the Senate chambers, Assembly chambers, and in front of the governor's office, with people chanting and rallying for marijuana justice. And although we didn't get it over the final finish line, that drove the conversation that week in Albany. And we have to do it again. We have to just continue to escalate and make it very clear to them that we'll hold them accountable, that we are the folks who actually put them in office. And if this is a priority for us, it has to be a priority for them as well.
Again, the site is
smart-ny.com, and it's the Start Smart campaign, which is supported by hundreds of groups across the state. We know that this is an issue that intersects with so many different interests and facets for people. So no matter what brings you to the issue of cannabis regulation and legalization, plug in. This is the pivotal moment, and we need you.
And I just want to say to all of our listeners who are not living in New York, which is many of you, please send this to everyone you know in New York so they can do something. It's a game changer.
Please.
New York is 25 million people. It runs so much of this country. The fact that we are still living in the dark ages is unacceptable and inexplicable and always baffling. Melissa, thank you. And I want to thank Drug Policy Alliance for doing this work for 35 years? How long have you been doing this?
It feels that long. We've been around about 20 years as officially DPA, but so many of our amazing colleagues have been in this work for decades upon decades, and it's really their leadership that's brought us to this moment.
And no one realizes it, so I'm here to say to everybody, if you're also going to support smart-ny.com, think about also supporting the Drug Policy Alliance. It's really an important organization. Thanks again, Melissa.
Thank you so much.
So again, you can see all the actions you can take on our blog. They will be listed there. Please feel free to bug your legislators and send this to everyone you know in New York. It's a state with 25 million people, and it could really change the forces for legalization on the East Coast.
Yeah, we definitely will also make sure, listeners, that we will get those links posted across our social media channels. So you can visit bravenewweed.com and find the article that accompanies this episode, and the links will be in there. But also you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and doing a little bit of digging, we'll make sure we get those links up there for you as well.
When I was in Israel several years ago, I went to visit a nursing home south of Tel Aviv. I didn't really know what to expect. All of my previous visits to nursing homes had been pretty unhappy, sometimes actually miserable. There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of screaming. There were a lot of people lingering. They felt like unhappy places. This was a very different experience. This nursing home was cheerful. The people inside were engaged. They were smiling, and many of them were smoking blunts, which is what happened in Israel when legalization of their medical program occurred. They only had flowers, but they learned early on that using cannabis, even by smoking a blunt, often with tobacco in it, really helped ameliorate a lot of the symptoms associated with dementia, pain, some of the suffering that just came with aging and the loss of one's consciousness, loss of one's mind. That organization was run by a nurse called Inbal Sokorin, who we had a wonderful interview with. And she subsequently went on to found a company called NiaMedic that has now opened nursing facilities for elders in California. Our guest this episode is the CEO of NiaMedic Global. His name is Alon Blatt, a fellow Israeli, and a brilliant man who is really trying to bring this plant into wider use by instituting it along with other medications that people use in nursing homes. I really want you to listen to this. We all know people who are older than us, who are aging, who are not looking forward to the latter parts of their lives. And to think that cannabis can be a benefit to that and really ameliorate some of those conditions is really fascinating and groundbreaking and extremely counterintuitive. So listen into this. Alon is a great interview. I was really happy to have him. Alon, I'm very happy to speak to you today. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I want to tell you how I first came across. Well, it wasn't called NiaMedic at the time. I first discovered medical cannabis being used in a facility for patients with dementia when I was in Israel reporting my book. I was brought to a clinic that was on a kibbutz. Actually, I think it was called Haradim. Am I correct?
Kibbutz Na'an.
It was Kibbutz Na'an, exactly. And I was really expecting a terrible experience. In fact, before my father died, he got dementia, and my mom and I went to a few facilities in the U.S., actually in New Jersey, where they lived, just to see if it was a viable possibility. And the places were pretty horrible, I have to say. They were unhappy places. They were noisy. People were in all sorts of states of strange distress, or they were quite drugged in really dispiriting ways. So when I walked into this place in Israel, it was a very different experience. It was almost a happy place. I mean, people were quiet. They were eating. Nobody was screaming. Of course, my favorite visit was with a gentleman called Moshe Roth, who was sitting in a wheelchair puffing a spliff, actually. And that was his medication at the time. I think it was 1 at 11 in the morning and 1 at 5. And he was a very happy spirit, which I know for a fact was not the case when he first walked in. So I was pretty blown away by this experience. And I'm very happy to tell our listeners that these clinics are now up and running in the United States as well as Israel. And you have a lot to do with that. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so
That
much.
was a long introduction. Tell me how you got into this and well, tell me how you got into it. Let's just start.
Well, first of all, just to show that you're able to go to the Haradim project. The Haradim project was exactly as you said in Kibbutz Na'an. It was led by the person that is today our head nurse, Inbal Sokorin, and that just shows how far back you go, right? Really into the beginning of the cannabis, the medical cannabis movement. I say the medical cannabis in the true essence of it. So the way I got into it, basically, like every other person, I went through some hard times. Back in the day, I used to work in finance, work very long hours. And, everybody sometimes suffer from a little bit of depression and problems sleeping and a lack of appetite, and just wasn't very satisfied with my life. And I remember I went to see a psychiatrist to try to help myself. And before I even sat down on the chair, the psychiatrist said, okay, we're going to start with a treatment plan that includes like 4 pills. And I got so freaked out. I said, wait, what? I'm a healthy person. What are you talking about? And then I was introduced to cannabis by a friend of mine. And I remember my first reaction when he said, oh, okay, take an inhale from this and an inhale from that when you come back home. I got a little bit upset. I was sharing with a good friend of mine, I'm not feeling very well. And it's like somebody would offer me a shot of whiskey.
Yes. But now were you in Israel at the time?
No, actually, I was in the U.S. Okay. And what happened was, then I followed his recommendation and I saw, oh my God, this cannabis thing is not just like getting high or getting drunk. It actually does something. And it unbelievably improved my quality of life. So I started looking more into it.
Can you describe the difference between, say, taking a drink or two and using the cannabis in that way?
Absolutely. So I can tell you that when I first started, he recommended on 2 strains, and he said because I used to work 17, 18 hours a day. So he said, as soon as you get home, you take 1 inhale from this strain. That's going to give you appetite. And then after half an hour, you're going to take an inhale or 2 from the other one, and that's going to help you fall asleep. And not only it helped me with my appetite, because I was so stressed, I couldn't eat throughout the day. So at night, I would come back, and all of a sudden, I would enjoy food so much. And not only that, I guess the feeling that I had, I can only describe it as being at the eye of the storm. They always say that at the eye of the storm, it's a beautiful, calm moment when you can see you can see the storm around you, but you're right in the center and it's calm.
Nice description.
And that's really how I felt. And all of a sudden I was able, because when you go through depression, at least from my personal experience, it feels like everything you look at is like with sunglasses. Every aspect of your life, you just give it the negative switch to it. And that kind of helped me take off these sunglasses and look maybe with pink glasses, if you will, but not necessarily in a way that it changes your reality, but rather just like when you are in a good mood and you think about certain things, you look at them in a positive way. That's exactly how I felt. But I saw that for me, the feeling it lasted much more than just an hour before I went to sleep. Because for me, knowing throughout the day, and I wasn't medicating myself throughout the day, but for me throughout the day, I always had like, quote unquote, the ammunition that I accumulated the night before of good thoughts that kept me going throughout the day, and I always knew that no matter what, when I come back home, there's something that's going to help me kind of clear my head in a positive way, not again in a way that changes my conscious. And that was kind of my personal experience with it. And then I found it very, very interesting, and I started looking more into cannabis. And as I looked more into cannabis and kind of, looking at different sides of the industry, I at the time, I still got, thank God I have my grandparents. And I started looking at the geriatric side of things. And I've learned that, when it comes to geriatrics, older adults, you usually see, depression is something that's very common, problems sleeping, issues with appetite, suppressed appetite, lots of pain. And then from the little that I saw about cannabis, I was like, wait, there's like a perfect match here, just from those basic facts. And that's how I started looking. And then I started going into conferences. And one of the early conferences I went to in Israel, that's when I had the pleasure to meet the woman that will change my life, which is Inbal Sokorin, who back then was the head nurse of Tikkun Olam. And she ran the first nurses clinic to help patients with medical cannabis in a medical settings, a medical form. And from there we started talking, and we were both looking into how can we bring the cannabis in the most professional way to the senior population. And since then, of course, that we saw that cannabis helps the senior population much more than just those 3-4 conditions that I've just mentioned. And we're just scratching the surface here, and we're finding unbelievable ways in which cannabis helps improve the quality of life for patients by supporting all the symptoms that are associated with older age and in general. So there are unbelievable things there.
I just want to backtrack for a second, because we said that Inbal was working at Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is, just for anybody who doesn't know, is a very large grow operation, and I think distributor in Israel, perhaps the largest. And I think her role there was to sort of begin testing and seeing how these products actually affect different conditions and different symptoms. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Maybe I think it's worth telling a little bit about how she started and what happened there, because I think that's fascinating. That's really the inception of, I would think, the field in many ways, because Inbal was the head nurse and the general manager of a nursing home in Kibbutz Nan, as we described earlier. And she tells the story that one time the son of one of her patients, who was actually a doctor, came to her and said, look, I saw this documentary by Zach Klein in Israel, which is it's called Prescribed Grass. And I think I want to try it with my mom. Well, her first reaction was, of course, like everybody else back then, it was like, are you nuts? Do you want to bring drugs into my department? Well, no way, Jose. I mean, and then he said, like, please just maybe get in touch with the director and start talking. And that's what happened. And then she said, okay, let's start looking at the literature. So she started looking, and she saw, well, there was really nothing there except for preclinical. And there was a guy that keeps coming back in all these articles called Professor Rafi Meshulam, who today is considered to be the patriarch of modern medical cannabis research. So thankfully, she was only like half an hour away, a drive away, because Israel is small. So she went to Jerusalem and met with him, and he said something very simple. He said, look, if you'll bring me mice, I can probably cure them for so many diseases. Just for skin diseases, I found over 50 uses for medical cannabis and how it can cure skin diseases with mice. But when it comes to human, I have no idea. So the story goes that they decided, okay, let's sit together and start doing a clinical trial in the nursing home administered by the medical staff. And I think they decided to look at 6 commonly seen symptoms, which is pain, agitation, polypharmacy, insomnia, and I'm probably missing 1 or 2. But that's how they first started looking at it. And back then, it's crazy to think because it's only 10 years ago, but they had absolutely nothing. Meaning, even when they decided, okay, let's try, because we can't let all patients smoke. When you gave the example of Moshe Roth, with Moshe Roth, it's because he was already a tobacco smoker. So with him, it was easier to smoke. He was smoking also a pipe. But
right.
Most patients don't smoke. So they actually re-engineered a vacuum cleaner to basically to turn the motor in order to create like a crazy, I don't know if to call it
vaporizer. Wasn't it
exactly.
a vaporizer? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's how they used, they had no protocols whatsoever. They didn't wear a mask. They didn't know anything. The whole concept of getting high was just completely different. Dosing, there was nothing. They really had to build everything from scratch. From scratch.
That's right.
Understanding interaction with all kinds of medication. Now, the first patient that started, just so you understand how severe the case was, the one that I mentioned with the son that was a physician, the mom there, the patient was severely demented and with severe dementia, and the way she didn't communicate or anything, and the way she breathed basically was she would inhale and then scream, ah! I'm not going to scream into the mic, but and 24 hours she would just scream and scream and scream, and they moved her around between different nursing homes. Nobody wanted to get near her, and Inbal, being the angel that she is, said, I cannot turn away any patient. And so from this crisis came this unbelievable opportunity. And the results that they saw there, just like you described at the beginning of the podcast, that's exactly what they saw. They saw, oh my God, there is a better way to improve the quality of life of patients.
Yes, when I was there, I'm sorry to interrupt you. When I was there, she told me that she was about to quit because it was such a dispiriting job and that everybody was just unhappy. And all they were doing was stopping unhappiness with medication. But the unhappiness was always there.
Exactly. And especially when you talk about nursing homes, again, going back to my interaction with my grandparents and looking at different options and seeing nursing homes, and I was just blown away when I saw that 2015, 2016, and people in nursing homes are still being tied to beds because what can you do? You have 40 beds, you have 3 nurses, everybody is screaming, especially when it comes to dementia, and moving around and can hurt themselves, and they tie them. And I said, it's impossible. That's how we treat our elderly. And God forbid, I'm not here to I'm not blaming, God forbid, the medical staff. Because just like what you said with Inbal, it's frustrating to get to the point where you want to help, but there is absolutely nothing you can give to help. So what are you really doing there? And I think
okay, go on.
Yeah,
please.
and I think that what you said is exactly right. Inbal described that you said, "What am I doing? If I can't improve the quality of life, and all I'm doing is dispensing pills into patients' mouth and just making them drool machines, what's the point?" And
yeah, it's a very good question, by the way.
Exactly.
Really
and I can tell you that when we started, I can tell you that Inbal, the first time I met her, she came out with our motto. Because she said, look, modern medicine knows how to prolong life. We know how to prolong people's life. But nobody talks about the quality of life. And therefore, our motto, and I remember the first time, I remember when I was standing at the conference when Inbal was telling me, look, what I want to focus on is the quality of life in that length of life. That's what it's all about. It's time that we give the respect to our seniors and show that there is a better way of getting older, a better way in which our symptoms are not controlling our lives. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I want to ask you, so yes, there's definitely are many better ways of getting older. I'm not even a proponent of extending life as far as it necessarily can go. I'm not really, I feel very ambivalent about that, but that's another podcast and another time. And we could certainly talk about that. But I want to talk about, so there you are, you're in finance, you're sort of depressed. She's doing tikkun olam. She's probably quite frustrated doing tikkun olam. I know there's another story behind that one. So tell me how we got to where we are today.
So I should say that after the great success of the Haradim project in Kibbutz Nan, then really news teams from all over the world came, and they basically wanted to come and show how these crazy Israelis are doping the seniors and the elderly. And just like what you experienced, they saw unbelievable things. And then Inbal came together was approached by a group of growers. Back then it wasn't a company, it was a group of growers called Tikkun Olam, and said, let's work together. And she said, look, I'll only do it if you let me open a clinic, a nurse's clinic, where I can collect data and I can treat people in a medical settings. And that's what happened. And they opened the first nurse's clinic. And with time, they started building the protocols and specializing and really kind of understanding, okay, let's build this whole thing. Let's start to see what are dosages, what are the interactions, what do we do, where is the potential here? And then in 2016, as I mentioned, I went to a conference, I met Inbal, and she was telling me, look, I love what I do, but at the end of the day, this is a nurse's clinic. And my heart is with the senior population, and that's what I want to do. And it's really fit to the way I looked at things, and together, and then we brought in our third partner and our CEO in Israel, Nir Dro, and together we decided to build a platform that is multidisciplinary with paramedical staff that really focuses on seeing patients from beginning to end. When I say beginning to end, is from the beginning of the treatment with the diagnostics and everything, all the way through till we reach the treatment goals. And we saw that, okay, this is great, but there's still something that is missing there, because we had quite we were very advanced based on all of Inbal's knowledge. But we saw that this is not sustainable, because again, from whatever we know, this is not enough. So we also had to create basically a research platform. And then we were very fortunate to be joined by Professor Victor Novak, who is the head of research authority at the second biggest hospital in Israel, as well as his staff in Harvard University, used to be the medical director of clinical trials there. And basically we said, okay, from now on, we're going to treat every patient in addition to treating them, but also collecting the data so we can continuously improve our treatment method, do research, and see where the potential takes us. And that was basically the foundation for NiaMedic. And we...
Did you begin in Israel?
Yes.
Did you open clinics?
Yeah, we started because we were thinking whether to do it here or there, but we decided that the best thing to do would be in Israel, where we're comfortable, where we have so many colleagues and so many connections. And it's a lot easier for us to start kind of prove the model by doing it first in Israel. Because, I can tell you the truth, I have spoken here. I actually had a list, I remember, till today. I spoke to 14 doctors here in the US. And one of them, as soon as he heard the word cannabis, he said, I don't want to ever hear about it. Thank you very much, and hung up. But 13, okay, to say to their credit, said, okay, that's interesting. I don't know anything. I'm afraid. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to risk my license. Thank you very much. And that's where it ended. And in Israel, we were able to find the doctors and basically build the team to make it happen. So that's what we decided to do, because we saw that basically patients here, physicians here are concerned and want somebody to, some sort of somebody to back them up, something that they can refer to. And that's why we decided to start it in Israel, built the backbone of the company, built all the protocols, all the treatment methods, and all the innovative, dosing methodologies that were very different than what we have here. And I'll go into that in a minute. But we decided to do that. And then once we came here, after a year and a half of working in Israel, we got here, we were able to partner up with UCLA that recognized what we do, the benefit of what we do. And now we have a partnership in terms of research. And doctors found it a lot easier to work with us because they saw it's not completely new. Meaning they can already base it on something. There are specific protocols that they can work on, and medical team that they can always refer to and consult with in Israel. And that's how we went on. And that's and since then, we've opened a clinic in Orange County in a hospital. I was actually very fortunate. The COO of the hospital reached out to us, said that we've read about what you did. We tried to deal a little bit with cannabis, but not really successfully. Don't really know what to do. Would you be interested in partnering up in any way? And we said, of course. And that's how we opened our clinic in the hospital. We also see patients in Beverly Hills. And next month, we're going to open another location in LA, not too far from the Beverly Hills location. So, that's kind of how we're proving. What we're really focusing on is not just cannabis for the sake of cannabis. We always said we're not a cannabis clinic. And I always give the example that, I wouldn't go to a cannabis clinic just like I won't go to an antibiotics clinic. I would like to go to a doctor that has many tools in their toolbox and knows how to integrate and which one to use in the most appropriate time. And that's how we look at cannabis. If we're seriously looking at cannabis as a medical treatment, it has to be integrated with the overall conventional care. So that's really our focus. And, in Israel, we have a team of pharmacists, for example, that all they do is just focus on the drug-on-drug and cannabis-on-drug interactions. Since, as you know, with seniors, we see a lot of polypharmacy. Polypharmacy, for whoever, if somebody doesn't know, it's the condition in which patients take over 7 or 8 medications per day. And of course, there are a lot of complication and interactions there, which can be very dangerous. So that's something that we're trying to work on. And we have a team of pharmacists that's all they do.
So there you are. You start a clinic in the United States. What is the difference between dosing? You mentioned this before. What is the difference between dosing in Israel or dosing in the United States? We're talking about science. We're talking about a similar plant with obviously with variety, but what is the difference?
So there are a couple of major things to keep in mind. The first thing is that in Israel, cannabis was strictly medical. Okay, whereas in the U.S., I would talk specifically about California, even though it was really just medical since '96, but it was pretty much recreational since then. And when we came here, what we saw is two very interesting things. One was that strains here are bombarded with THC and myrcene.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's all about the high, regardless of all the other components and compounds. And the second thing that we saw is that for some reason, the standard dose is centered around 10 milligrams. And it was different for us because we work with microdosing. So the first challenge,
is how many milligrams would a microdose be?
1.5, when we start, it's a fraction. It's a fraction of a milligram.
Wow.
Meaning it can be 0.3, 0.5. Again, because when we do our treatments, what we do is we include 1 month of case management because everything has to be customized for the patients, and we all have our endocannabinoid system sensitivity is different between different people. So what we do is we follow the general rule of go go slow, go low. And we start with very, very low dosages until we're able to hit the sweet spot for the specific patient. So that's why for us, and many of the patients, I don't want to say most of them, but a big portion of them were able to get to the sweet spot, which is way below 10 milligrams. So the first start with 10 milligrams is very, very high. I can tell you that we don't have a single patient that uses pure CBD. Every patient gets some amount of THC, but based on a study that we did and presented at UCLA, only 6% of the patient reported to feel the psychoactiveness in the form of lightheadedness, which means that 94% of patients never felt any different in terms of adverse side effects of the psychoactiveness. And that should make sense to us, because we're associating cannabis all the time with just getting high. But in the true medical sense of it, we see the getting high part as an adverse side effect.
Yes, of course. A lot of medical people see it that way, and that's fine. Can you? I love that you're starting at those micro doses. Has there been any consensus on what that average starting dose might be?
So I can tell you that we start always the lowest, which when it comes, for example, to tinctures, we'll start with 1 drop, unless it's very, very, very condensed. It goes, and 1 drop, it depends on the company, on the product, on
and the concentration, of course.
The concentration. Yeah. It can even depends on other things such as the size of the dropper, which we saw it's not consistent. So
it's not consistent, of course.
Exactly. So, but one drop, which is the lowest we can go, that's usually how we start.
And is there a number of milligrams that is considered a starting dose?
That's a good question. That's something that probably the medical staff can answer. But I can give you, again, usually it's 0.3 to 0.5. That's usually where we start with. Mm-hmm. And that depends on, as we said, the specific product. But I don't know if there is, at least not that I can answer. I'm sure the medical staff can give a number here.
Okay.
But and again, we've seen a few patients that actually responded right from the first drop, which you have to understand. 1 drop is micro dosing.
Yeah.
It's even for babies, you give them more than 1 drop eventually. So
I know. Well, in fact, babies are more resistant to cannabinoids, but that's again another podcast.
Right.
My suspicion is that the older we get, the more sensitive to cannabinoids we get, but it's only my suspicion. There's obviously no evidence there. But can we move on to the topic of dementia and cannabis and how we think this might really be helping? Because I have to admit, Alon, I don't really know what dementia is, other than an increase of plaque on the brain, on the neurons in the brain, which causes the firing to sort of get all mucked up. But can you help me understand probably a more intelligent description of dementia and how cannabis might mitigate some of those symptoms? Do you have any insight into that at all?
Yeah. So first of all, again, if I haven't said it before, I should probably say it now. Just as disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional.
Thank you. I'm not either.
It's very important to point out, and therefore, everything I say is not in medical grade, if you will.
No, but you will have the advantage, as I have, is that we can speak plain English, which a lot of doctors seem to be incapable of doing for some reason.
Exactly.
I'm not quite
I like
sure
dumbing
why.
things down. But yeah, so, when we talk about dementia is basically, it's a broad category of brain diseases that, cause usually long-term and gradual decrease in the ability to think and remember. And, it's significant enough to actually affect the person's daily functioning. Another common symptoms, of dementia that we see are emotional problems. There are difficulties with languages, decrease in motivation, agitation. So, it's of course, it comes from our brain, and there's some sort of deterioration there that goes on. And when it comes to cannabis, so as we know, the endocannabinoid system in our body has receptors all throughout our body. The two main ones are CB1, CB2, and we see a high concentration of CB1 receptors in our brain. And what we see is that, when it comes to, there's been a lot of hypotheses, hope that's the proper way of saying that dictates that cannabis is a neuroprotector. And we've actually seen it in preclinical studies. One was actually done not too long ago. I want to say it was, I think it was done in Germany in collaboration with the University of Bonn and the Hebrew University with Professor Zimmerman, in which they basically microdosed older mice. And they were able to show that their brain functionality for the control group that took the cannabis actually improved, that brought them back to the function of their in their prime. So we have been seeing that constantly with mice. I can give you more examples that in Israel they did preclinical studies where they actually caused strokes for mice. Okay, I won't get into how because it sounds brutal, but all in the name of science, I guess. And they saw that the sooner you apply the cannabis after the stroke, the better and faster the recovery is. And in Inbal, when she did the study at the nursing home, they took it to the next step, and they were able to basically administer it to people that had stroke, and they saw the same results. The sooner they apply the cannabis. So we definitely see a direct link here between cannabis and how cannabis helps protect our brain. Now, again, that's not specific to dementia, but it's more on the side of the cognition. But we've actually also seen in our data with our patients that patient that came back, so every patient that comes into our clinic go through a series of assessments and tests. And they also go through cognitive testing. And one of the tests that we use is never mind, it's called MOCA, and it's scored 0 to 30. And based on that, we can determine whether there is cognitive impairment. And we saw that when patients came back for the follow-up after treating cannabis for 6 months, we saw that they improved better on those tests, 2 to 3 points, which is up to 10% improvement. But still, we haven't published that or included that in our publications because we weren't able to scientifically isolate the specific reasoning, because there are two options here. It's either what we think, our hypothesis that cannabis is a neuroprotector and therefore helps with our cognition, or B, that thanks to the fact that people using cannabis, they're using less pharmaceuticals and medication that kind of, make them a little bit of a zombie. So by not taking this, it frees their mind a little bit. But either way, the end result is the same. So we definitely see the unbelievable effect of cannabis. Now, when it comes to case studies or anecdotal cases, just like you saw when you went to the nursing home, when it comes to agitation, you see a lot of aggressiveness. You see, real struggle for patient. And we see with the cannabis, it just helps with that. So that's really something that when it comes to dementia, I think, they're talking now also, it's a little bit different, but when you talk about different other things like Alzheimer, right? And there have been a number of studies that shows that basically cannabis, and I say cannabis because I'm not familiar too much with the studies and which components of cannabis, I don't even know if they're mentioned, but they actually help remove the plaque, the amyloid beta cells, which are the poisonous proteins that later on develop into dementia. So we definitely see here, that's one of the interesting cases with cannabis that I would say it's the next stage in the cannabis treatment evolution. What do I mean by that? When Inbal first started, the whole cannabis use was geared towards controlling the symptoms. Slowly, with that, we start seeing that cannabis actually helps with the diseases themselves, the causes of the disease. For example, we see these days that cannabis in different rheumatological conditions helps and is anti-inflammatory. So it's not only helping the symptoms of pain and spasticity and all these others, it actually helps working on the issues themselves. And now, just like the example I gave with the amyloid beta, we see the potential of cannabis being a preventative treatment, which is just unbelievable. So we see a direct link here, and it shouldn't be a surprise that we see that cannabis interacts with our brain and help in many, many ways.
So you have now 2 places in California, 2 clinics.
Yep.
Do you have a waiting list a mile long? Are people eager to get into these? Do people know about the effects of cannabis with dementia or just general aging issues?
Yeah, well, absolutely. There is a great response to what we do. A part of the challenges that we deal with is, of course, we need to educate.
Yes,
and
that's why we're doing this podcast.
Absolutely.
One of the reasons, anyway, besides the fact that you're really interesting and doing groundbreaking work, and we thank you and love you for it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. But absolutely. So that's a challenge, because we take probably the group of the population that is most, I would generalize and say, most conservative, and they've lived the longest under the prohibition, if you will, of cannabis.
Yes.
And, these are people that grew up and were taught their whole life, cannabis is bad, cannabis is a gateway to the worst thing imaginable. And now we're trying to come and tell them, wait, actually, you know what? That's actually going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. And that, along the fact that there's so much misinformation here. And, it also ties to what we talked about earlier. And that's something we found out that when we started working here. In Israel, the only people that came out with statements were medical staff, because cannabis was strictly medical. When we came to the US, we saw that since everybody can use cannabis, and we know that cannabis affects different people in different ways, people start coming up with all these claims about cannabis. And then even as a doctor, or even as a common Joe from the street, right, you are able to, if somebody would tell you, I have this drug that's going to help all the problems that you have, it's all the pain that you have, it's this, it's amazing, that you're going to say, okay, thank you very much, but you're crazy.
Yeah.
It's too good to be true.
Yeah.
So that's what we're focusing mostly with people, is kind of showing them, look, here's the data. And we were very fortunate to partner up with serious organizations such as UCLA. So it gives us the backing, and people appreciate that more. And then they see the results, which is the best part.
It's the best part. So, but where is the data? Where can one see the data if one wants to see something?
So,
do you post it? Are you public about it?
Here's the thing.
How do you make it available?
So what we do is we're actually going to have our new website up next week. And then we're going to have...
Well, that's not going to matter. Tell us the date when that's going to be up.
Right, that's true.
We're probably, this, right?
I would say that we're looking at towards the end of of March. I would say that by the end of March 2019, the website is going to be up and going, and then we're going to have different materials. Now, we have to keep in mind that we can't release the data as raw data, of course, or just as data, because there are HIPAA requirements and HIPAA restrictions.
Of course.
So only things that have been approved and published or peer reviewed, or different posters that were just accepted on our behalf. So that's all going to be available along with a lot of other educational materials to help understand really what is the endocannabinoid system? How does it interact with our body? Because as you said, education is key. So first of all, to understand the mechanism, it's the first and most important step towards better treatments.
So in this new data, what are some of the? Can you give me some highlights of what people might find, or what would be surprising? Some of the most surprising things that you found, for example, or interesting?
Well, in terms of interesting, so I would say let's start from the negative. Okay, because that's what we always do. Meaning, when I say negative, it's not necessarily negative. We're really focusing on the safe use of medical cannabis And therefore, what we need to do is before finding out how it can help, we need to make sure how it can do damage and avoid that. So based on our records and data, and that's consistent with the available literature out there, about 5% of the population don't respond to cannabinoid therapies, which is so much better than any other medication you can think of almost. So 95% of the people respond to cannabis treatment. Based on our data, almost 93.8% of the patient reported improvement in their overall condition.
And they were able to, I mean, these are patients with dementia, they're able to report their overall condition?
So these are not just dementia people. These are people, so in this study that we did, the average age was 78. People had different condition and illnesses. I don't have the specific data for dementia. I have more the general, but we saw that, and I think that's remarkable, right? Because if you take into account that almost 93%, or excuse me, almost 94% out of the potential 95% that are responsive reported improvement in their condition, that's pretty remarkable. We also saw that 87.5% of the patient reported significant pain reductions. And just to give a number to that, so I should also give a little bit of background information that in Israel, while we're very advanced in the science of cannabis, the regulation is still horrific. So you have to go through hell and back in order to get a cannabis license. So in order to get, let's say, the most common indication is pain. So just to give an example, in order to get a cannabis recommendation in Israel for cannabis, you have to show that you were treated in a pain clinic for over a year. You tried at least 2 opioid treatment that failed, and only then you can find a doctor to get your recommendation, and then the recommendation goes to the Ministry of Health. Takes another 4 months. It's a long process. Why am I saying all of this? Because the median pain level of our patients before they started the treatment was 10 out of 10, which basically means that most people, experience their pain in the most, describe it as
they were not happy. Yeah.
the excruciating pain imaginable. And after the treatment, actually after 6 months, but we saw the reports a lot sooner, the pain level went from 10 out of 10 to 2.5 out of 10.
Amazing.
Which is significant.
Your dosing protocols are amazing. I have to get a copy of them.
Thank you. Yeah, and another important thing that relates specifically to the U.S. because of the opiate epidemic, that over 50% of our patients stopped using opiates.
Yeah, we've done some podcasts on this, and the evidence just seems that it really enables people to cut their use and even go through withdrawal with less pain and difficulty. So that's very encouraging.
Exactly.
What else? What other things? So that's pain and opiate use. Is there any other interesting sort of surprising correlations that you've been able to see or draw?
So another issue that we see with the senior population is suppressed appetite. Oh, yeah. Now, as soon as we say that, usually we hear giggling and people are laughing.
Oh, that's not my problem.
You got the munchies. Exactly. Yeah. No, but people, as soon as we say about this, it's like, oh, that's not my problem. How do I stop eating? That's my problem. But with all seriousness, we do know that it's a very, very serious issue for older adults. A very serious issue. And we saw that over 50% of our patients reported great improvement in their appetite. So, I'm not sure exactly. I think it's the same here as it is in Israel, but I think in Israel there's a law that says that once somebody is being force-fed using a zonda, you're not allowed to ever get them off of it.
Oh, I don't know if that's the case in the United States.
Exactly,
horrible.
I'm not sure, but basically it's horrible, and it's basically there's no way around that, because if some people are just even if they're depressed or they just don't have appetite, they just stop eating, and it's a very short road to what. So the fact that we can actually show that cannabis improved in a medical way, what we did was we took the munch and we tried to give it a medical twist, not a twist, but explain to it. Now, I can also say, they're different. From what I know, there are 4 mechanisms in which cannabis helps with the appetite. Through our brain, there are three processes. There is through our stomach, through the enzyme, the ghrelin hormones. Sorry, not enzyme, through the garlic hormones. But what's interesting to know is that while it helps improve our appetite, it doesn't necessarily mean gaining weight. Meaning we saw that the average, that cannabis users on average consume 600 more calories per day than non-users. Having said that, there was no gaining weight recorded or reported. There are actually another study that shows that the waist circumference of cannabis users is smaller than non-users. There are a lot of very interesting things, but when we start looking into that, we saw that not only cannabis helps improve the appetite, but the key here is it also helps improving the nutritional indexes. And, somebody who understands kind of the idea of homeostasis and balance within our body, we can understand that even in cases where somebody can eat a lot, but their body doesn't know what to do with this food and how to maintain the nutritional balances, how much proteins do I need and how much sodium and how much this and how much that, it's a serious issue. We saw that actually cannabis helps with bringing better results, more balanced nutritional indexes, which is key to good health.
So sign me up. How do I get on the list here for when the inevitable is going to happen to me? I mean, do you have a waiting list a mile long?
No. So actually, now we're expanding the team. So we're trying to usually see patients within a month of signing up. I would say 3 weeks to a month, and we're now expanding the team so we can work with the demand. So that is great. So people, of course, can always give us a call. Our phone number is 833-364-2633.
Are you sure?
Or of course, yeah, no, it's always, I'll tell you why, because we took the number. Why am I saying that? Because our number is 833 NiaMedic.
Okay. NiaMedic. Let's just spell it out for folks. Okay. 833 NiaMedic. Okay.
Exactly. So that's why it took me a second. But yeah, or of course, go online to our website, and the number is there. Just Google NiaMedic. But we really see, one other thing that we saw, but that was just from our initial study that we did, which since then we saw better results, but also reduction of auto medication, which we saw around 17%. And these days, the numbers are actually much, much better.
Fantastic.
So there are a lot of great benefits. And what we're going back to the middle of our conversation, what we're really focusing on is integrating medical cannabis in a medical way as part of the overall treatment.
No, I understand, and it makes complete sense to me. It's a really interesting proposition. I just want to ask you one final question. I mean, I could talk about this for a long time, but in the service of time, what has been the response of sort of traditional medical providers who work with this population? Are they skeptical? Are things changing? Is there any hope?
Absolutely.
For mainstream medical acceptance? That's my question. Is there any hope?
Yes. I would say that, there are two types of doctors, and now we're introducing the third type. The first type of doctor is the type of doctor that when you tell them cannabis, as a patient, you tell them cannabis is like, don't ever talk to me about it. I don't want to hear about it. Cannabis is bad. It's drug. The second type of doctor is the type that says, oh, cannabis is good for you. Why don't you give it a try on your own and let me know how it worked?
Okay.
And now we're trying to introduce the third type of doctor that said, oh, cannabis, okay, let's work on it together. And we see more openness. We get a lot of referrals from other doctors from different disciplines. Any discipline that patient experience, whether it's pain, neurological issues, rheumatic issues, different internal conditions. So, and we see more and more referrals. And what we're trying to do in order to get the referring doctors also more involved is when a patient come in, they go through a full medical / geriatric assessment. They take an hour to an hour and a half, and then we also include 1 month of case management. So after the 1 month, when we reach the treatment goals, we actually send the summary to the referring physician. So they not only hear it from the patients, oh, I'm doing better, they can actually see it in a medical way.
Yeah. They need to see those reports, don't they?
Exactly. So that's how we also work with the physician. We also did CMEs, which is continuing medical education.
Brilliant.
We had over 100 physicians attending.
This is good.
The hospital. Yeah.
Listen, this is great news, and you're really at the forefront of this. And obviously, the world's population is getting older. This is not going to cure dementia. It's not going to stop dementia, but it may make it less horrible and less painful for those who suffer with it. So I want to...
And their families.
And their families, certainly. I'm one of them. I was one of them anyway. So I want to thank you on behalf of our listeners. I want to thank you for spending this time with me. It's been really interesting, and I hope one day to be able to get into one of the clinics and see how this is working. I'd really love to do that.
You're always welcome.
Thank you, Alon.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Joe and I will continue to publish every episode of the Brave New Weed podcast for free for you, our listeners. But we could always use your support. If you've got a little extra change rattling around in your pocket, you can cruise over to patreon.com/bravenewweed and become a supporter of the show. Everything that you'd pledge to support helps us to increase the guests that we can have on the show, even eventually the frequency of the show. And we have a great set of rewards out there, including copies of Joe's book, invites to special events that we will do in New York City, all sorts of fun things. So if you're enjoying the podcast and you would like to support us, visit patreon.com/bravenewweed today. Great interview, Joe. And despite your joke about my age earlier, I did find it absolutely fascinating. I think that end of life care is something that as a society, we've sort of let really slip for a long time. We owe older generations a lot. And, from my age group, there's a lot of angst toward, the baby boomers and that, because the anger toward the economic situations, environmental situations, and everything like that. Sure, you can point fingers all you want, but that doesn't really change the fact that, if people are suffering when it comes to the end of their life, that's not cool. And finding ways like this to ease people's pain, to, mentally or physically, and just guide them to their twilight years in a comfortable and enjoyable and happy manner. I think that everyone deserves that kind of care and that kind of attention. And if cannabis can do it, that's amazing. And I think that should be something that is really, really looked at.
Thank you, Matthew. Before we sign off, I want to remind our listeners that Medical Cannabis Mentor is the sponsor of this episode, and that, again, we are going to offer anybody who wants to try one of our courses a 30% discount off the listed price. And you can ask me, since I'm the founder of the company, for a coupon if you email hello@medicalcannabismentor.com. We'll be happy to supply you with that. Matthew, thank you again for joining me. I hope everybody listens to this episode, and I hope they share it widely. Any final thoughts?
I definitely will. Well, what do we have coming up on the next episode, Joe? You were talking about a very interesting conversation you just had.
I really, when I was in California, I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about women's issues and the use of cannabis for them. So our next segment is going to be an interview with several really amazing women. I'm not going to mention their names quite yet, who are creating products and really tackling some of the issues that women face particularly. Cannabis has always been a male-dominated industry, and women are really rising up now and really taking some major roles there. So we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about issues that I haven't known much about: vaginal issues with sex, issues with comfort and ease, and also with aging as well. So tune in and listen to that episode. It's really fantastic.
Thanks so much, listeners. And just a reminder that the Brave New Weed podcast is distributed across all the major podcast publication platforms. So whichever way you like to receive your RSS feeds and your podcasts, all you got to do is search for Brave New Weed. But you can certainly find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, the newest Pandora podcast platform, and many, many more. And as always, we thank you for listening.
Share this episode if you liked it, just with one person. Thanks and farewell.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @BraveNewWeed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.